Австралийн хүмүүс Welcome.
Сайн байцгаана уу хүнд үзэгчдээ. Өнөөдөр орой манай дефактоны төрөлгийн зочноор DCAF буюу Цэргийн Хүчний Ардчилсан Хяналт гэдэг нэртэй энэ Швейцарт байгууллагын дэд захирал оролцож байна. Good evening.
Good evening.
Please tell us about the organization you are representing and you're working with.
Yes, thank you. The organization which I represent is a Swiss initiative. It's an initiative of the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Defense jointly. It goes back to the year 2000. Switzerland had joined the so-called Partnership for Peace in 1996 and had taken on a special responsibility for promoting democratic oversight of the armed forces and the security sector. And we needed to think of a platform for implementing this task, so we came up with the idea of establishing such kind of an organization. In the beginning we had 20 member states, 20 states which helped us to set up this organization. Now we are 61. So you can see within 12, 13 years a very quick growth. So there is quite a demand, but also a need for our services. Now what do? We basically do three things. On the one hand, we document and analyze best practices in the field of democratic governance and oversight of the security sector. Security understood broadly, so it's not only defense, it's also intelligence, it's police, justice, border management. And then obviously, now that you've just been talking to Mr. Barroso, we have, in Europe at least, we have emerging structures of collaborative management of borders.
So, yeah, in particular the Lampedusa issue.
Yes, yeah. So this is one aspect. The other aspect is direct cooperation with governments, so our member governments, but also like-minded governments. You don't need to be a member to be working with us. It helps to be a member, but you don't need to be a member. And then thirdly, we reach out into international organizations. We seek to promote our, say, expertise. Certain programs, for example, with NATO, we have a program on integrity building, so fighting corruption in the security sector. With other organizations, we have other cooperation.
So you said that in the security you include armed forces, police, justice, court. What else?
What was the last one?
Court.
Yes, court systems.
So
Yes.
why it is so important to have a good governance there in security organizations?
Well, we are basically a development organization. So what we are trying to do is we are helping countries, nations to develop themselves. Classical development work is more in the fields of agriculture, in the fields of institution building, in the economic sphere. But we have made the experience, and not only ourselves, but other governments have made the experience that very often in these processes of development cooperation, the security sector was left out. And as a result, it did not develop. So the problems that you had at the beginning, you still have at the end of the process. Okay. And as a result, And consequence, it's almost like you can compare it with exercising. You exercise some muscles, but you don't exercise the whole body. So some muscles then are well exercised and others are not exercised at all. And what we are saying is, look, the security sector is important. If it is corrupt, if it is not, if it is oversized, if it is not under democratic control, you are not going to build a democratic state. And you will constantly have interference, well, either interference in, say, in the worst case, or you will have a sector which you are not controlling and which is most possibly not offering the kind and supplying the kinds of services that the society needs as it develops.
See, ordinary Mongolians, for example, look at the security organizations like being completely security. They are for our national interest, for our interest, and maybe they can go without rules immediately, for the sake of a quick reaction. What do you think of that? We don't know much.
It is important to understand the security sector. If you want to build a democratic society, you cannot have parts of governance, of the governance sector, which is not controlled. The principle of democratic governance is that the taxpayer, the voter, pays taxes and has therefore the right to have insight into what the money is being used for. And this insight can be direct or it can be indirect. Indirect, say, delegated to the government, but still it needs to be transparent and it needs to be accountable. So if we ask people to pay taxes, we, as the government, have to be transparent about what the money is used for.
Including the security sector.
Yes.
The whole report of police and the, it's called the, intelligence office, all should be also reported publicly?
Well, it is for the government to decide along which lines this reporting has to take place.
But overall, because it's in the budget, we are to know.
We have to know. We delegate it to the parliament, so the parliamentarians are, if I'm the voter and taxpayer, I'm giving this obligation and right, it's both an obligation and a right, to the parliament. So I expect from the parliamentarian that he understands and that he also maintains this control function.
Say ill-governed security, how it can damage national interest, national security. Can it do it?
Say in the past, not only in the Soviet or Soviet type past, but also in the West, the security sector was always kept apart. National interests were seen as being too important for the people to interfere with them. Only some specialists, most of them in uniform, were supposed to understand and govern the security sector. But the world has evolved, and what we now have in, say, at least Western democratic countries, but an increasing number of non-Western democracies, is this consciousness and awareness that if you don't control, oversee the security sector, you are sooner or later going to have a problem.
Who will control them?
Who will control them? Well, there are different types of, it's a concert of different instruments, if you want. So, first and foremost, there is executive control, internal control and executive control. within the services, within the ministries, what would seem to be important is that these services have clear procedural rules, and that, again, these procedural rules do justice to the values of accountability. You need to know whom you are accountable to, of transparency. You need to know the rules. The rules need to be clear, and of human rights and fundamental freedom.
Welcome. Well, take the US. Now, thanks to Mr. Snowden, yes, we'll find out that even the US government has kept bugging, listening to even their close allies, and nothing to say about ordinary citizens. Yes. So even if in the US they cannot control, how can we control that here?
Well, it's easier if you're a smaller country, on the one hand. On the other hand, this is a process, and it is a dialectical process. So dialectics here means that you need to formulate for every stage in the process the rules for accountability and transparency. The security of a country is always in challenge. It is challenged from the outside, but it can also be challenged from the inside. And so can also be the governance of the security sector. You have different political parties. Different political parties don't see things the same way. Mm-hmm. That's what makes them different.
That's why we need opposition.
Yes. Also, the security managers, they have, if you want, something like a natural tendency to be secretive about what they're doing. In a way, they're also being paid for not letting everyone know what they are doing and how they are doing it and with whom. So what we talk about is to find the right balance between secretiveness and openness, between democracy and, say, vertical organization of a service, between freedom and security.
Okay, please tell me, for example, how can I make sure that my phone is not being listened by the security officers, provided that a person is doing nothing, against national security. But however, how can we make sure that they don't listen to our conversation?
You mean a service within the country?
Yes.
You can not be 100% sure, but you can put in place a law that regulates the standing operational procedures for eavesdropping, for listening in on a person's phone. So in many countries, it is not just the service which can decide that they are now going to listen to all these people's conversations.
So they should have some permission for that.
They need a law, and within the law, they need some provisions, or along with the law, they need some provisions for the execution of the law. So maybe a judge's order. A judge needs to decide, okay, we have reason to believe that this person is a security risk, say, or could also be a security risk of a criminal kind, and therefore we need to know more about what this person does. But it is the judge, based on the legislation who decide.
Is there any country which reports at the end of, say, particular financial year or whatever in annual book of the organizations that the security office has been listening to that amount of people and for that amount of time, and they have dropped the case, and it was saved certain things or prevented the damage to national security, etc. If there is such a country or cases?
Not to my knowledge. There are, to my knowledge, no official reports on this. But certainly, say, the parliamentary committees, depending on, again, on how the state is organized, if it is a presidential democracy, then it is probably not the parliament or the parliamentary committee which has the right to ask for this kind of information.
All right, parliamentary committee. So the ordinary citizens can ask parliamentary committee to check with.
Yes.
Okay, probably you know the case of election day, previous election on July 1st, 2008, 5 Mongolians were shot. Yes. Police, and they found bullets, police, certain people, and at the end, I don't know, we don't know who really shot, why they shot, by which order. Looks like we will defend human rights. That declaration is not enough. No. What can we do?
We can learn. I mean, we cannot bring these people back to life. We don't know. I don't know why they lost their lives and who made them lose their lives, but we can learn from that.
Most importantly, we don't want them repeated again.
That's right. So this is why I'm saying
So who will make sure that it doesn't happen again?
In a democracy, you have a number of actors. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it is in the best interest of the police or whoever was responsible to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. Now, how do you do that? One needs to much of the police work in crowd control is what I think is what we're talking about here, is about not getting to the point where you have escalation. Mm-hmm. So how to avoid this kind of situation. So, and this needs to be laid down in procedures, and it needs to be trained.
Can civilians be a part of that?
Civilians can be part of it in different roles. First, if we look at what needs to be done for the future, then one needs to have a law or something like a provision on crowd control, on riot control. What do police do? What kind of police do we send in? How are these police armed? Are they armed or not armed? Because that plays a role. And how do they prevent situations which lead to escalation? So this is what the police can do. The public, well, say the parliamentary committee on security can insist on seeing on an investigation of the past events, and they can insist on such rules and regulations.
But if they do not,
then you have the media. The media can bring this up again and say, our parliamentarians are not doing their job. We don't see any appropriate action on the side of the service which was involved, and we don't see any appropriate action on the side of the parliament, which is supposed to oversee the government, and the service, the function.
In Mongolian case now, they keep changing the parliament.
Yes.
Next parliament is promising something, and we don't. For example, in case of a murder or the death of a Democratic Party leader, many years ago, 13 years ago. Until now, we don't know what exactly happened. And everybody who is coming to power promising to find it out. Never happens. What can we do?
Well,
can we sure that it is not happening again?
Democracy does not mean that everything becomes better. And it does not mean that everything becomes better immediately. We have to live with an imperfect world. But what democracy can do better than an authoritarian regime is if the people organize themselves. Civil society organizes itself. The media seek to create a higher level of transparency. You elect politicians not because you are related to them, they are your cousins, or because they promise you something, but because they represent a political party which has a party program which in the past, and obviously that's a problem of young democracies, but which in the past has shown consistency in delivering on promises, then in the process, in the longer run, you can hope to create a higher level of transparency, of accountability.
How Parliament can oversee armed force actions to make sure, security, everybody, to make sure that all this goes in line. Who is the body and how it can work to make sure that we can control them?
Yes. There are, as I said, there are different levels of control. An important first level is the internal control. So in the line of command, you have control. The person at the lower level is responsible to the person at the higher level.
Control means it should be in rules or regulations.
Yes.
So
this is within the line of command.
We found out at the recent 5 persons death case, we found out we don't know who is who. Control how it did work. Everybody is refusing. Sometimes they say no, but at the end, maybe a few colonels are in prison. 5 persons died. And that's it.
Let's come back on this, but let me answer your question first. So within the line of command, you have control. Then supposedly there is a civilian defense ministry. So a political organ which has the political control, political executive control of what happens in the services. The minister is a political appointee. He's not a person from the service or the force, but he's a political appointee. Then you have a parliamentary committee on defense and security. Now what can the committee do? Often the work is of the parliament is called the work of the lawgivers. Parliamentarian is a lawgiver or a lawmaker. So they have to see to it that the laws which exist don't contradict each other, and that for all the cases that may arise, that there is actually a legal basis for addressing these cases. So this is called the rule of law. There should not be white areas in this landscape of possible security emergencies and challenges which are not covered by law.
How to make sure though, we don't know how many white areas are there, but it's happening, this sort of cases from time to time. And today, as a young democracy, this country really needs to establish that structure,
Yes.
which makes sure there is no white spot. Can you tell us, since you have been working in Gorno-Karabakh, Chechnya, and several other former communist countries, what are the very good cases where you would like to, which you can share with us?
Well, maybe to come shortly back to the previous question, one of the things that my organization does is to help parliaments to establish the white spots based on the practical experience which we have from other countries. So we can say, look, we think you have a problem here in future because this is a white spot which is not covered by law. We suggest you address this.
You mean you will go through our procedures and you can find out the white spots?
We will go, and we do that regularly, and we go through the legislation of countries. We go through the procedures based on the legislation of countries. If the country invites us, we don't do this just for ourselves, and we only do it, say, confidentially on behalf of the parliament or of the service.
Is it necessary to be a member for that?
No.
No.
No. It is necessary to be a like-minded country.
You are on time in the right place, I think.
Yeah.
So tell us about the best cases of former communist countries on these issues.
Well, in many communist countries we had a first phase of enthusiasm, revolutionary or reformatory enthusiasm.
Which goes through maybe decades.
Yeah, which goes to the 1990s, and then some frustration because things didn't work out. And now we have some sort of a reversal. We have a neo-authoritarian regime, or at least partly neo-authoritarian, elected or quasi-elected in many cases, and that's it. But then we have other countries which used to belong to the sphere, the socialist sphere, communist sphere, which have turned. Not the countries, not the republics which you mentioned, or the entities which you mentioned. But we see, especially in Southeast Europe, and maybe Mr. Barroso mentioned that as well, we see a turnaround. We see that the security forces were reformed, that new legislation was put into place, that the parliament started to work as a control organ. That is also important. Much frustration comes from the fact that people would like to do something, they would like to do the right thing, but they don't know how to do it. So new parliamentarian, or people say, we would like to be parliamentarians, elect us, we will do this and this. Then they come into power and they don't know how to do it.
Or they don't want to do it.
But
there are some cases.
A different class of people. But some people are full of goodwill. They come into parliament and then they don't know how to do it. And the security persons say, look, you don't really understand this, we do it for you. And then after half a year, 2 years, nothing happened. And people get frustrated.
That's why in Mongolia now, our police, justice, court, all this new reform is going on under the leadership of our new minister, Temujin.
Yeah.
And I think what you said is exactly, that's what we go through today. Mm-hmm. And now after all this euphoria, now we find out, no, there are so many things. We suddenly see police colonels becoming exclusively rich suddenly, or court system. And now the law is becoming so much, works for some people, it don't work for some people. And so this is the level of democracy we really need to measure cleaning.
We see this in every post-authoritarian country. The new system is much freer, but it also creates opportunities for different types of actions. And these opportunities, if there are no laws, they are not illegal. You're finding it very difficult.
The principle of democracy.
Yes. So what is very important is that the legal framework is put in place, but also this control framework. And we see that in many new and young democracies, that the governance structures that would be needed to deal with the new freedom are not yet in place. It takes much longer than people thought it would take. And if you had an authoritarian system, then the president would say, okay, this law, sign, next week we sign 3 laws more.
I understand. And how to get all this thing done a little bit faster? What does it take for that? In different countries it takes different measures. But what we can do, and what our organization can do, if we are invited, is we cannot force anyone to take a political decision. That is not our job. But we can prepare, together with your experts, we can prepare the basis for taking decisions. So, as I said before, we can analyze the existing legislation and we can say, here we have a problem. We can say, look into the existing procedures of oversight. If, as you said, and I have no possibility to verify that, but if you say there is a problem with corruption in certain services, then it means that oversight within the service is incomplete, imperfect. It also means that probably that oversight from outside is not in place or is weak, and we can show how this could be improved. What instruments would be needed, mechanisms, procedures to improve the oversight. Also, we can do that on the background of our experience with other countries which have gone through similar processes and which have succeeded in addressing them. So this is what we can contribute. We would like to contribute that if we are invited. We have to be invited. I think what you just now said is exactly as we say, as a doctor order. I think you are at the right time, and I think you are welcome. And there is, I think, very strong will in the country now to cover this white spot as we talked. And I hope your people trip, and further your work will help us a lot to make this country more democratic, and people sort of have a certain oversight on our security and armed forces, which somehow we just starting to understand how important is this.
You take it for granted. You think that someone should take care of it, but you have to take care of it.
We found out it's quite not easy, long-term work, and I'm so happy that you, with your expertise, are in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have been to Mongolia a number of times. I always felt very welcome. a nice country, nice people. I feel very warmly about the country, so if I can contribute, then I will gladly do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.